There was just something about the 90s era of Nickelodeon shows where aesthetically they looked like off-the-wall drug trips, with unconventional art styles featuring crazy character designs and colour schemes, yet at the same time could also be some of the most down-to-earth, slice-of-life type cartoons out there. And my personal favourite of all these shows was Hey Arnold. A show which, despite featuring a child with a football-shaped head, a girl with a pronounced monobrow and Dumbo-like ears, and a grandpa with a chin resembling somewhat of could also feature some of the most down-to-earth, hard-hitting episodes of any kids' cartoon, telling challenging stories that revolved around broken family dynamics, poverty, war, social isolation, and even addiction. So, I want to go through and talk about some of these most hard-hitting moments in the series, in what I believe are to be the top 5 saddest Hey Arnold episodes. Oh, and I do have a video going over the top 5 darkest moments if you want to check that out too. Chocolate Boy. This episode focuses on the side character Chocolate Boy. Yeah, we never really learn his real name. Chocolate Boy has appeared in several episodes throughout the show, mainly just as a gimmicky side character who was obsessed with chocolate.
There's somebody swimming in the chocolate!
Phoebe, what a truly vivid imagination you have. We all know there's no way anyone could...
But this is the first time, and only time, that we actually get him center stage. In this episode, Chocolate Boy makes a bet with the school bully, Wolfgang, that if he manages to go 2 weeks without eating any chocolate, he will be given a £10 bag of chocolate absolutely free. But not long into the bet, Chocolate Boy soon begins to struggle, and so goes to Arnold for some help. There are a lot of parallels here between Chocolate Boy's addiction to chocolate and to that of someone who's been addicted to drugs, as he begins to suffer major withdrawal symptoms, which only gets worse as the episode goes on.
Little chocolate ants in a little chocolate line.
Willikers! He's looking at...
But Chocolate Boy manages to complete the 2-week challenge and wins his £10 bag of chocolate, much to Arnold's dismay, as he had no idea the whole thing was just for a bet, and genuinely thought that Chocolate Boy was doing this to just better his life. After quickly devouring the bag of chocolate, Wolfgang comes back to Chocolate Boy and offers him more chocolate, but only if he does a stupid dance for it first. Though initially agreeing, Chocolate Boy soon feels humiliated and runs away, and it's not until later when he's in a dumpster rummaging around for chocolate that he sees that he has a problem. He goes back to Arnold and begs him that he wants to get off the chocolate for real this time. Arnold reluctantly agrees, and during a hypnosis session, we discover that Chocolate Boy's love for chocolate originated when a nanny he loved left him, and the parting gift she gave him was a bag of chocolate, to which Chocolate Boy would eat as a way to numb the grief.
It's okay that you miss your nanny, but eating chocolate is not going to bring her back.
I know!
And it's in this moment that the side character with a gimmick of eating chocolate goes from a comedic relief to a tragic tale. The episode ends with Chocolate Boy declaring that he's given up chocolate, but now instead seems to have an affiliation for radishes, showing that although he's kicked the habit of chocolate, he still has the void inside of him that he's trying to fill. And this is true for a lot of people who suffer from addiction, in that they will kick one bad habit, but will then immediately start up a fresh one, because they've merely tackled the symptom and not the cause. So when the episode ends, you can't help but have some mixed feelings about the whole thing. A bittersweet ending, you could say. Road trip. The episode begins with the kids making Mother Day cards in school, except for Arnold of course. That's a nice detail. Whilst the other kids are putting a lot of effort into their cards, Helga isn't, and when questioned as to why, Helga gives this response.
In case you haven't noticed, Phoebe, Miriam isn't exactly world's greatest mom material.
Now this is something that's never flat out mentioned in the show, but it is heavily implied that Miriam is an alcoholic, with the way that she's constantly dazed and confused, will take naps during the day, and has a passion for drinking her, quote-unquote, smoothies.
Pass the Tabasco, dear.
Yeesh. What a nut job.
I need a smoothie.
And I think it hurts in the way that we hear Helga tell this to the other kids.
I'd love to have a mom that wasn't always messing up and making mistakes.
You can feel there's a lot of anger and frustration in her tone, to then how it fizzles out to a disappointed, almost defeated kind of tone at the end.
But I don't. I've got Miriam.
But what's even sadder is the way the other kids just brush it off as not being such a big deal, and that Helga should just simply give her mum a chance.
Naps behind the sofa while I'm starving to death, or constantly forgets to pick me up from soccer practice.
Well, no one's perfect.
You should give your mom a chance, Helga. Have a little faith in people.
Like, Helga kind of opened up a lot there, and her feelings were just downplayed. Later in the episode, Helga was supposed to be going on a road trip with her mum and dad, but due to her dad having to leave for work purposes, Helga is now stuck with her mum. Despite all the negativity Helga says about her mum, we see that Miriam isn't intentionally a bad person, as she is trying to make a conscious effort to bond with Helga, and from the conversations we get between the two, we see how Miriam actually lights up when she talks about her past.
And then when I was 15, it was the summer of love.
Which I think indicates that how she's currently in a state of depression, and so looks back on her past with fond nostalgia, and is probably why she currently drinks as a means of escapism from her present day-to-day life. Things don't go well on the trip, however, as due to Miriam's recklessness, she ends up spilling coffee over Helga. Though due to the way she's walking, I do question whether it's just coffee that she had been drinking that day. She also loses her purse and the directions, and when she goes to check the map that she's packed, it turns out it was just a map for Wankyland. Okay? Eventually the car ends up getting written off and needs to get fixed, but it's going to cost them $497.98.
Well, this here fix-it job is gonna set you back $497.98.
Is that car mechanic the ancestral relative of Scruffy from Futurama?
Life goes on, but I believe we'll forever carry the pain on the inside.
Helga finally reaches breaking point and tells Miriam that she's a lousy mum.
You're supposed to take care of me, but you couldn't even do that. Face it, Miriam. You're a lousy mom.
Now, of course, the episode works things out, as there was conveniently a bull riding contest. Miriam enters the contest, wins the prize money, and so the car gets fixed. Her and Helga patch things up, and the episode ends. But I think this episode was a great dive into the broken dynamics of Helga's family, and is something that would get further explored in a future episode. And that is an episode that we will be covering later on in this list. Parents' Day. The first two-parter on this list, and was the episode that gave us some backstory on the whereabouts of Arnold's parents, as the situation of Arnold's parents had never really been brought up in the show before. When the show's creator, Craig Bartlett, originally pitched the show to Nickelodeon, he briefly explained that Arnold's parents were travelers who were out making documentaries, hence their absence from the show. But as the series went on, fans would increasingly start to write in letters asking about what happened to Arnold's parents, and so to address this, Craig wrote this episode to explain their backstory. But this backstory would now be very different and much darker to what was originally pitched. The episode's premise is that there's a parents' tournament weekend coming up, in which the kids team up with their parents to beat the other kids and their parents in a series of events, where the winners get to take home a prize-winning trophy.
Everybody wins this weekend. The trophy is more of a symbol, really.
Yeesh, what a tea cozy.
Whereas the other kids are excited for the tournament, Arnold is not, yet goes along with it anyway with his grandparents, as they were super excited for it. The tournament seems to be going well. That is until the egg throwing contest, where Helga and her dad lose the round, in which he then yells this at Helga.
We are not gonna let some orphan boy and his ancestors win this parents' weekend thing. You understand?
Arnold overhears this remark, which causes him to freeze on the spot, which also gets them knocked out of the egg throwing round. What I like about this scene is despite the fact that Helga is normally the insulting bully in the series, even she immediately realizes that her dad crossed the line, and she even tries to apologize to Arnold later that day, though be it not a very successful apology.
I mean, you know you don't have parents. You don't need my dad pointing it out to you. I mean, it's tough enough being all alone in the world, but...
Thanks, Helga.
Later that night at the dinner table, Arnold says that tomorrow he doesn't want to go back to the tournament, and that although he thinks his grandma and grandpa are great, they just simply aren't his parents.
You and Grandma are great and everything, but you're not actually my parents. I don't know if we belong there.
This was a real stinger of a moment, as you can just see the gutted look on his grandparents' face, And even for Grandma, who's usually a zany character in the show, takes the moment completely serious.
He needs you, Phil. You better go talk to him anyway.
Okay, wish me luck.
Grandpa heads up to comfort Arnold and asks if Arnold would like to hear another story about his parents to make him feel better. Which, for context, at the start of this episode we see Grandpa telling Arnold a story about his parents, but it's very dramatized and clearly has a bit of fiction added in to make it more entertaining. Arnold says that he would like to hear another story about his parents, but this time he wants it to be the truth. His grandpa obliges and tells Arnold that his parents met out in the jungles of San Lorenzo, where they would provide humanitarian aid for the tribes out there. Eventually they would marry and have Arnold, but due to the hazards around them, they figured it would be best to move back home to the city and raise Arnold with his grandparents. Things seem to be going well until Arnold's parents receive word that a nasty disease is spreading amongst the tribes in San Lorenzo, and that Arnold's parents are the only hope of finding a cure. The parents make the difficult decision to fly back out, with the intention that they would only be going for a week. But after that day, they were never heard from again, and their plane was never found. Later that night, Arnold has a dream from when he was a toddler, and is crawling around the boarding house trying to find his parents. He's then picked up by his grandpa, who begins telling Arnold fictional stories about his parents to help comfort him. Then Arnold gets a series of flashbacks to the times that he's had with his grandparents over the years. The next day, when Arnold goes down for breakfast, he tells his grandparents that he wants to enter the tournament after all, as even though they're technically his grandparents, to him, they have been his parents.
Really? But I thought you said it was just for kids with actual parents.
Yeah, but for me, that means you and Grandma.
The three head to the tournament and manage to beat Helga's family in a contest, thanks to a little help from Helga.
Go for my dad's ankles. They're already loaded down to the max.
What I like about this is that Arnold's family still doesn't win the tournament, and I think that was crucial, as it shows their reasons for celebrating aren't simply because they won, but more so just because they had a great time together. Later that night, Arnold has another dream, this time in present day, where he climbs onto the roof and finds a lone plane. He then climbs into the plane and flies off into the distance, where the episode ends. Man, I guess the fans asked, and the show more than delivered. Which is good, as I always assumed that having to give birth to a child with a cranium of that structure would have just killed his mum during childbirth, and the dad was so distraught/disgusted by the whole thing that he simply fled and now lives the life of a crackhead. I'll admit, this episode's lore is a little better. The episode not only sets up an interesting plot point which could now be further explored as the show went on, maybe, but also gave us one of the saddest, yet also heartwarming episodes of the show. I love the serious moments with the grandparents, and the joy they have when Arnold says he wants to do the tournament after all. Plus, this was one of the few episodes where Helga also gets a bit of a wholesome moment too. And not forgetting the music of this episode. I love hearing that soft piano score as we get Arnold flying off into the distance. The Journal. Following on from Parents' Day, we have the episode titled The Journal, which came out 2 seasons after Parents' Day. Now, this isn't just a 2-parter episode, this is a 2-parter, making it kind of like a TV movie. In this episode, the other kids are planning to have a big day out at Dino World, but Arnold is feeling a bit down as today marks the anniversary of when his parents left him, and so decides not to go and wishes just to be left alone instead. Later that day, Arnold says that he is sick of missing his parents and begins packing up all the items that remind him of them to have them stored away in the attic. As he is doing this, he finds an old journal that was originally written by his father. Arnold shows it to his grandparents, and so Arnold's grandpa begins to read it out loud. The journey details on how Arnold's parents met and how they fell in love, with apparently some parts of it going into quite some detail.
It was the hottest night the jungle ever had. Oh, there was...
Jesus, just how much detail did Arnold's dad document about their sex life? What if he also drew an illustration for that part? There's also a little bit of an inconsistency here, as in this episode, Grandma is shown to have her grey hair in the past, Yet in the flashback we saw in Parents' Day, she is shown to have brown hair. We also get more information about the Green-Eye people, who are the locals living in the jungle that Arnold's parents helped over the years, but also information on how the Green-Eye people helped Arnold's parents over the years too, saving their lives and offering support for when Arnold's mum was going into labour. Surprisingly, unlike Parents' Day, which had a pretty serious tone to it, this episode has much more of a light-hearted one, as we see the shenanigans that went on with Arnold's parents, alongside Grandpa's commentary throughout the readings.
Today I met the woman I'm going to marry. Oh, that's sweet. Hope he's writing about your mom, Arnold.
Grandpa.
But as the episode gets to the end, the tone soon begins to drop. Because as wholesome as the journal is, with Arnold's dad talking about how great their family life is, we, and the characters in the show, know how it's going to end. As Grandpa reads the last page, we get the same story we heard in Parents' Day, where Arnold's parents are asked to go back and help the Green-Eye people who are currently dying from a deadly disease. I think it was good that in this episode we get more information on the relationship between Arnold's parents and the Green-Eye people, and that the mutual help they've given each other over the years. So when it later comes to the decision where Arnold's parents head back out to the jungle to try and help them, it's a lot more understandable as to why they would do so. After they are done reading the journal, Arnold asks if he can take it outside to look at it alone for a little while. Whilst reading back through it, Arnold notices a map hidden inside, which shows the location of where his parents were heading out to. Excited by the sight, Arnold rushes in to tell his grandparents where the episode ends. So for a little context on this episode's production, after the release of the Hey Arnold the movie, Nickelodeon apparently asked Craig Bartlett to make the final 2 double-length episodes of Season 5 serve as a sort of prequel for the planned second Hey Arnold movie, which was in pre-production at the time. Unfortunately, however, due to the poor box office performance of the first Hey Arnold movie, Paramount Pictures never gave the green light for the second movie, and thus the project was cancelled. And though we would eventually get the Hey Arnold Jungle movie, that wouldn't be until 2017, 15 years after this episode originally aired. So even though the majority of this episode is lighthearted, what really hit me when growing up with the show was at the time, this was the ending of the series. And it was a cliffhanger of all things. There was so much potential and questions being left that were all going to go unanswered. And it was infuriating. And although Craig Bartlett would drop hints as to what the film's plot would have been, he didn't want to give it all away, just in case that on the off chance, the film would eventually be picked up. And of course, with hindsight, he was right to do this and his gamble paid off. But for fans at the time, it really felt like we were never going to get those answers. And even when rewatching this ending all these years later, I still got that sinking feeling in my chest that I did all those years ago. Pigeon Man. Now we're really getting into the hard hitters. This episode begins with one of Arnold's pigeons, named Chester, falling ill and needing some urgent medical attention. One of the kids suggests that Arnold takes him to a guy known as the Pigeon Man, a mysterious figure who lives on a rooftop, never leaves, and is constantly surrounded by pigeons, with some people believing him to be a half-bird, half-man type of monster. Arnold sets up to the rooftop and finds that Pigeon Man isn't a monster at all, but rather just a regular guy named Vincent, who likes to take care of birds. Arnold leaves Chester with Pigeon Man and returns the next day to find that Chester is fully healed. In a way to say thank you, Arnold offers to take Pigeon Man out for pizza. Pigeon Man reluctantly accepts the offer, and for the first time in years, leaves his rooftop and accompanies Arnold to a nearby pizza restaurant.
The mushroom pizza was exceptional. Are these bits of pineapple? Now that's strange.
See, even Pigeon Man finds pineapple on pizza weird. Some of the other kids spot Arnold with Pigeon Man and come up with the idea to head to his rooftop and start messing with all his stuff. Things soon get out of hand as the rooftop gets destroyed and the kids end up fleeing with all the frenzied pigeons chasing after them. Later that day, Arnold and Pigeon Man return to discover the damage. And I'm telling you, even though Pigeon Man doesn't say anything, you just see the absolute saddened look in his face, and it is just gut-wrenching. I mean, Harold has done some pretty scummy stuff over the series, but this is easily his low point. Arnold tries to reassure Pigeon Man that it will be alright and that they can repair the damage. But Pigeon Man is less saddened by the damage itself, and more so by the notion of people in general.
They're birds. I trust them. I understand them. It's people I don't understand.
This hurts a lot, as earlier in the episode Pigeon Man explained to Arnold that when he was a child, his friends thought he was weird for looking after birds and so stopped talking to him. And then after years of isolation, the moment Pigeon Man begins to open up his trust again, it's immediately thrown back in his face. Arnold feels guilty about the whole thing, saying that if he had never convinced Pigeon Man to leave the rooftop, none of this would have ever happened. But Pigeon Man reassures Arnold that in his act of kindness, he has showed him that there are still good people out there in the world. Pigeon Man decides it's time for him to leave the rooftop, and with the use of his pigeons, he flies off into the sunset. This end scene always hit me as a child, but I think as an adult you appreciate it a whole lot more. That feeling of isolation, mockery and judgment from others around you, and that internal thought of how you just don't feel like you belong.
Some people are meant to be with people, and others, like me, are just different.
The entire scene is taken incredibly serious, with no gags or quips to break up the tension. And the music is absolutely on point. Beautifully scored with a somber ambience at the start, but then builds to a more triumphant feel as Pigeon Man takes off into the sky.
It's time for me to leave here. Some people are meant to be with people.
Interestingly, there was a lot of fan theory that Pigeon Man actually jumped to his death in this scene, and that Arnold was envisioning him as flying off as either like a way of coping or a metaphor for Pigeon Man ascending up to heaven. But this theory got debunked by the show's creator in a later interview, who stated that this was not the case at all.
I always imagine Pigeon Man going to Paris next, where he helps pigeons in Paris.
Plus the fact that Pigeon Man does make a cameo appearance later on in the Hey Uncle Jungle movie confirms that he is still alive and well.
Goodbye, Pigeon Man.
Helga on the couch. The episode opens up with a child psychologist who has just started working at the school. She begins observing the students in their day-to-day lives and is immediately intrigued by Helga for her aggressive behaviour, particularly the amount that she shows towards Arnold. And after Helga is caught punching a kid named Brainy, she is made to attend a therapy session after school. Helga is not too enthralled by the idea, and neither are her parents.
We didn't have therapy when I was a kid.
That's obvious, Bob.
I don't want you blabbing to some school shrink.
Some things are best swept under the rug, Helga.
From what we've seen of Helga's family over the series, we can tell it has a very dysfunctional structure.
What is it about this house anyway? Everything's always going wrong at the worst possible time.
Her dad is abrasive and short-tempered, and often prioritizes his work over family life, and his pride over Helga's well-being. And Helga's mum, which we discussed earlier, is practically an alcoholic, who can be found napping throughout the day, becoming forgetful, and struggling to perform even the most basic of tasks, such as preparing Helga's lunch for the day. Helga reluctantly goes to the therapy, but what I find interesting about this is that she's not concerned about any dirt coming up on the dysfunctional family setting, but rather that she may accidentally confess her love for Arnold, kinda highlighting at how unaware she is of the greater issues, and how she's almost normalized it as an everyday kind of thing. Initially in the session, Helga tries to deflect any of the psychologist's attempts to reach out to her, but soon the two begin to bond, and Helga begins to open up about the hatred she has for her older sister Olga, as she was always seen as the favoured child, with Helga often getting ignored and forgotten about, even resulting in her having to walk to preschool by herself through the cold and dangerous streets. And that was the first day that she also happened to meet Arnold, who offers her an umbrella and compliments her bow. And it's because he was the first person in her life to actually show her any care of attention, she immediately latches onto it, giving us the origins for when her crush on Arnold actually started. And again, like the situation with Chocolate Boy, this also turns what was previously a light-hearted gimmick of the show to something far more sad and depressing, in that the only reason she loves this guy so much is simply because he showed her basic acts of kindness. The other kids in the class notice how Helga has a thing for Arnold, and so begin to tease her, which finally causes all that pepped up anger of hers to lash out.
can keep it, or you'll have to answer to old Betsy and the 5 Avengers.
The way she talks as she's about to hit Harold, it's clear that she doesn't actually know what she's saying, and is instead simply mimicking something that she heard elsewhere. Maybe from her father, where although it's never straight up shown to us that Bob would ever use violence against Helga, or perhaps even her mother, it is often shown that Bob does have a short temper and will frequently fly off the rails. And because this act of aggression managed to get Helga what she wanted, she would then continue to use it throughout her life. This was something that was actually briefly touched upon in a previous episode, Helga and the Nanny.
You're such an angry girl, Helga, and you won't let anyone help you, so you must live with your unhappiness.
Eventually, Helga also confesses to the psychologist that she loves Arnold, and the psychologist reassures her that that's okay.
You know, the shrines and stuff, the 3 a.m. vigils, the tantric spells.
As long as you're not hurting anyone, it sounds like an okay way to express yourself.
I mean, maybe you should look into that a little. This episode kind of acts as like the conclusion for Helga's character in the series, as it finally addresses the aspects of her broken family life that have been hinted numerous times before, and gives us the origin as to how Helga originally fell in love with Arnold. But although she leaves the therapy with a better mindset, it shows that her underlying issues are still there. Maybe this was something that was going to be a bit more of a follow-up in the second Hey Arnold movie, but like the Chocolate Boy episode, this ending does leave the viewer with a bit of a bittersweet feeling. Before we get to the number 1 pick, I want to quickly go over some honourable mentions. Stinky Goes Hollywood. There's an audition going on for a kid to be the next spokesperson for a Yahoo soda product. All of the kids are excited to try out, except for Stinky, as he believes he's nothing special, and that auditioning would be a simple waste of time. Arnold convinces Stinky to come along anyway, and to everyone's surprise, Stinky manages to secure the role, becoming a celebrity icon overnight. Stinky is feeling really good about himself, having finally seen something that he's special at. But when wandering through the set, he overhears the producers talking about the only reason he was picked was because of the way he sounds so stupid.
So I'm a big joke, huh?
Maybe it's just a misunderstanding or something.
You see the absolute crushing blow this has on Stinky, and not wishing to be exploited, he turns down the $1 million contract and goes back to his regular lifestyle, much to his father's dismay. Miss Perfect. Okay, I'm going to mention this episode because I know people will be mad if I don't, but I honestly don't really feel it. So in this episode, we're introduced to a new kid at the school called Lila, who is a seemingly perfect individual who is smart, stylish, and gets the attention from all the boys. This causes the other girls to quickly become jealous of her, and so they devise several plans to take her down. Most of these fail, but eventually they do succeed, where they dump a bunch of rotten food on her and send her home crying. And man, you know you've got it bad when even Arnold is having a pop at your misfortune. The next day, Lila doesn't come into school, so the girls offer to take her homework and give it to her after school, just so they can further amuse themselves at her suffering. They are surprised to find that Lila lives in a rundown apartment with just her father, and upon further inspection, see that the two are living in poverty, and that her father didn't succeed in his recent job application. The girls feel really bad about what they've done, and so rush in to apologise, and now accept Lila as their friend. The reason I don't really vibe with this one is that the whole thing just comes across as very forced. The poverty aspect feels like it's just shoehorned in to make the girls feel sorry for Lila, but I think you could have still achieved this without them being poor. Just show Lila breaking down into tears and expressing how she's always had insecurities, and that the confident front she puts on is just a way of her shielding herself. That's still a valid reason to feel empathy for her, and perhaps Helga could even relate, as she too masks her insecurities, only she does it with aggression. And this may sound harsh, but I found the poverty thing almost felt comical in its approach.
We've still got 1 can of beans left in the fridge.
No, we don't. I ate them for lunch.
I don't know, that just felt funny more than anything. Reminds me of this dialogue exchange from Homer and Ned in The Simpsons.
Even the good book can't help me now. Why not? I sold it to you for 7 cents. Oh.
Not to mention that near the end of the episode, her dad gets a call back about the job again, and it's like, oh, you've changed your mind? I did get the job. Oh, well, that's great.
You changed your mind. I got the job? That's great!
Like, wow, that sure as hell was convenient.
Then everything is wrapped up in a neat little package. Really, I mean that. Sorry if it sounded sarcastic.
And then on top of the fact that this poverty aspect is never really touched upon again in the series, and that I never really liked Lila as a character anyway, as I felt like she was always stringing Arnold along.
But there's hope, right? Oh yes, Arnold, just ever so much.
Yeah, that's right, Lila. Give him false hopes that you can keep him at arm's length. You massive bitch. And now we get to, which for me, is by far the number one pick on this list. And that's Arnold's Christmas, the first two-parter episode in the Hey Arnold series. The episode opens up with the kids breaking up for Christmas, with Phoebe and Helga discussing what their favourite thing about Christmas is. Phoebe values the more wholesome vibe with the giving and the sharing, whereas Helga states that Christmas is all about getting the most presents possible.
It's about money and flash. It's about shopping like a barbarian. It's about getting yours before the other guy gets his.
With the one she wants most being the Nancy Spallone snow boots. But due to high demand, the boots have practically gone out of sale in every store. She also has the goal to get Arnold the most perfect Christmas gift ever, one that will be so amazing that he'll just have to fall in love with her once he opens it. Meanwhile, Arnold's boarding house is doing a secret Santa draw, and Arnold gets the house resident Mr. Huynh. Arnold is concerned about this, as Mr. Huynh always seems mysteriously sad around Christmas time. So in hope to get him the perfect Christmas present, Arnold tries prying him for information on what he may like as a Christmas present. The conversation doesn't seem to have much success, but whilst they are talking, Mr. Huynh tells Arnold that about 20 years ago, he used to live in a small village in a country far away, in which he had a young daughter there named Mai. Despite being very happy, a war was beginning to break out in the country, and fearing for his daughter's safety, Mr. Huynh attempted to flee the country with her. Even though this is never directly stated as being the Vietnam War, it's pretty obvious that it's meant to be. From the time period that it takes place in, how Mr. Huynh states that the war started off in the north of the country, and the fact that Mr. Huynh is confirmed to be from Vietnam in the episode Snow.
I don't care! I was in Vietnam in 1949!
I think it's also worth noting that Mr. Huynh's voice actor, Boan Coleman, was at the actual fall of Saigon in Vietnam, so I imagine the recording of the dialogue for this episode must have struck a personal chord with him. Unfortunately, due to the mass amount of people trying to escape the country, when they arrive to the helicopter, there's only room for one more person, and so Mr. Huynh makes the heartbreaking decision to give the last remaining space to his daughter.
I had to make the most difficult decision of my life. I knew I had to do the best thing for Mai.
As the helicopter is taking off, the soldier references the name of a city, and so 20 years later, when he was finally able to leave the country, Mr. Huynh set off to that specific city in hope of being able to find his daughter, that city being the one that he currently lives in. But since moving here, he's had no luck in finding her. Arnold decides to himself that in order to get Mr. Huynh the best Christmas present, he will try to find his daughter in the city. Him and Gerald head to the Federal Office of Information, in which they come across a guy called Mr. Bailey. Arnold asks Mr. Bailey if he can do a search for a missing person, but Mr. Bailey says that he's far too busy and still needs to get his Christmas shopping done before the store closes. So Arnold makes a deal with him. If they can do all of his Christmas shopping, then Mr. Bailey can help them find the missing person. Mr. Bailey agrees, and so Arnold and Gerald set out into town. Whilst out shopping, they bump into Helga, who is still trying to find the perfect gift for Arnold. As Arnold drops the shopping list, Helga notices that the one thing Arnold is still after is a pair of Nancy Spallone snow boots. As Arnold and Gerald search all over town, they are simply unable to find anywhere that has the snow boots still in stock.
Go ahead, kid. Tell us what you want.
A pair of Nancy Spallone snow boots.
And with the store closing time approaching, they decide they have no choice but to give up and head back to Mr. Bailey. Despite being able to get every other item on the shopping list, Mr. Bailey states that without the snow boots, the deal is off, and so sends the boys on their way. On their way back, Helga overhears the conversation on why they were so desperate to get those snow boots. Helga feels saddened by the ordeal and heads home. Her mother notices that she's looking a bit bummed out, and so allows Helga to open one of her Christmas presents early. And wouldn't you know it, it just happens to be a pair of Nancy Spallone snow boots. Helga is absolutely ecstatic, and immediately runs outside to try them out, but then notices Arnold's list fall out of her pocket. leaving Helga with a moral dilemma on what to do.
I could give them up and give Arnold what he wants, but then I wouldn't have anything. These snow boots are really boss.
She ends up going back to the federal office and hands Mr. Bailey the boots, but Mr. Bailey states that it's too late and that he just wants to head home. Helga pleads with him and says that if they don't try and find this missing person, the little football-headed kid may never believe in miracles again.
But if you leave now, that little football-headed kid will never believe in miracles again.
We open up on Christmas Day on the boarding house, where Arnold is feeling bad that he couldn't make Mr. Wynn's Christmas happen. Suddenly there's a knock at the door, and as Mr. Wynn continues to stare into the fire, he hears a voice call out behind him. Arnold wonders how this is possible, and Gerald tells him not to question it and just accept that a miracle is a miracle. We cut to just outside the boarding house where it's revealed Helga is standing as she quietly whispers Arnold a Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, Arnold.
This is such a great episode. It got me feels when I watched it as a kid, and I think I've only grown to appreciate it more as I've gotten older. I really like how grounded this episode feels for a Christmas special. Most other shows, when doing a Christmas episode, will often get all whimsical with everyone singing Christmas carols, or you have the classic appearance of Santa. With even the more down-to-earth shows such as Recess, resorting to having a Santa appearance. And these are fine and whatnot. Christmas is about the good feel escapism after all, but I just think it hits harder when the events happening are something that could actually happen in the real world. And even though the main plot centers around Mr. Wynn, I also think this is just as much of a Helga episode. Helga starts off this episode by being purely motivated on materialistic value, and even when she is shopping for Arnold's Christmas present, she is still only concerned with how big and flashy the gift has to be. So obviously it's a big deal when she gives up her prized possession of the snow boots, but I think this hits harder for a lesser recognized reason. Given what we later come to know in the series of Helga's mum being an alcoholic, who is often neglectful to Helga as a result, it makes her sacrifice all the more greater, as this is probably one of the rare, if not only times, that she's received a gift from her mother that was actually meaningful. And when Helga does manage to find Mr. Wynn's daughter, we're assuming that she's the one that helped escort her to the boarding house. But rather than walk in with her and take the credit to impress Arnold, she remains anonymous outside. And relating back to her and Phoebe's conversation earlier about giving and receiving, it's fitting that Helga managed to get the perfect gifts for not one, not two, but 3 different people, all while receiving nothing in return for herself, yet still feels that Christmas joy. And I think that was actually a pretty bold move for what was simply a kids show, to highlight a real world event that the US was involved in, and the negative impact it had on the innocent people. And so yeah, those were my picks for the top 5 saddest episodes in the Hey Arnold series. If you've made it this far, thank you very much for watching. Do leave a like if you enjoyed, and let me know your thoughts down below. Maybe there was an episode I missed that you felt should have been included on the list. But until the next one guys, take care.